Back in the shop and back in the hot seat again with another episode of Ask Brandon. Also, big thanks to everyone for the feedback on episode 1. We greatly appreciate it as we strive to provide more value. But before we get started, Brandon, how are you today?
Doing great. Lots going on. We've gotten to see a few cars back in the past week or two that we're doing some additional work on, so it's always fun to get them back, including a Cayman, my personal Cayman that we called Gator, a shop Cayman that's back for a transmission upgrade.
Oh, nice.
And so, it's been really fun getting to drive that car again and think about how much I miss it and wish I hadn't sold it, but it's gone to a good home. So just happy to see that one again.
Are you ready for this episode 2? I mean, we've heard a lot of great feedback from episode 1. Are you ready for this?
I don't know that I'm ready, but I'm excited. Like, this has been fun. It's good to get the story out and the message out. Yeah, no, it's been a great week at the shop. Gotten to spend some time on some development projects, kind of pushing the limits on a few of the things we're doing with ECUs, and then coming up with some new ideas to meet some interesting customer requests that I think will come to fruition and provide kind of some new product lines that we'll have in the future. Yeah, just lots of exciting stuff.
Lots of exciting stuff. I see that we also got a new machine, so it's going to be streamlining some of the process. I know some of the techs have been super excited to receive that and get it all set up. Things are moving around in the shop, so yes, it is definitely an exciting time to be at the shop.
Definitely.
Well, Brandon, let's just jump right into the first question. This one, like I said, has to do with company origins and backstory, so I feel like this one will be a good one to start with, as well as to inform everyone with. And the question is from Aaron. It goes, how did Slakker start? Tell us about your first couple of projects at Slakker, and what was your background before Slakker? Pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, it's been a crazy ride. My previous company I started in 2005. It was a wireless networking company. We had the opportunity to do some very exciting projects early on. At one time, kind of the origin of it was at one time Oklahoma City had the largest municipal Wi-Fi network in the world. And that was, we had 3 to 5 megabits mobile to 900 police and fire vehicles at a time when you could only get 56K on your cell phone.
Wow.
And so that was working on that and designing that and building that was what had launched my prior company. But after 19 years, had gotten pretty burnt out. There wasn't a lot of excitement, a lot of areas left to explore. I had a lab there that I just didn't get to spend much useful time in. And so I had an opportunity to retire and pass the reins on to somebody that started with me as a kid out of high school as a tower climber, and after 10 years had really grown and developed and was ready to take over. So that gave me an opportunity to go into retirement and start the next chapter. The concept of playing golf or tennis for the next 50 years didn't really sound that appealing, and so I actually retired on a Thursday and called up Ben Strader at EFI University, and he had an opening in his tuning certification class starting on Monday in Lake Havasu, Arizona. And so made some plane arrangements, went out there hoping that, I didn't know anything about it. I was just hoping it wasn't too cheesy, but being able to get a tuning certification, at least I have a certification to come out of it. But when I got out there, it was the school was essentially to fund his multi-million-dollar engine development lab that was just absolutely incredible. And that's when I knew this is what I want to do. I don't have any idea how I'm going to do it, but I would love to build a lab like this and devote it to the M96 and M97 engines, this little niche of engines that I was just absolutely obsessed with, or cars, and that just there wasn't a lot of development going on in that area. And I knew that, nobody else would sanely take the time and invest their money and resources to do it. And so off I went. Along the way, I was working with a pro race team that was launching and was going to be their crew chief. And I was looking for a couple of engines for the team and had dealt with many of the local or the US-based rebuilders and had mentioned to the team owner, if you ever heard of Hartech in the UK, we should probably reach out to them and discuss it with them, see if that might not be a good fit for us. And while having those conversations, I popped off and said, man, we really need you guys in the US. They had some specific technology that we didn't have available here. People had been sending their blocks overseas to get them machined and done. Their response was, well, you're the 12th person to ask and try. Happy to have some conversations with you about it. Kind of what was unique about my situation is, one, I had run small businesses before, and I knew what it took to do a startup, to the point that I'd sworn I'd never do a startup again. But here I am, just because they take so many hours and so much effort. And when you typically start a company thinking, oh, this is what I want to do and love, and just all of the other things it takes to run a business end up eating up all your time, and it becomes difficult, especially until you get to a certain size, to be able to even work on the things you enjoy. And so I've had about 6 months worth of conversations with them, and after that was signed an agreement in December of 22, and we began production in April of 23. They were incredible. Slakker as it exists today would not be around without them. Barry Hart, the founder and genius behind Hartech, and Lee Jenkins, who I consider the greatest Porsche engine builder in the world. Both of them really took me under their wing, taught me how to build engines, how to machine engines, and gave us access to all of their processes and their CNC code, and in exchange for a mutually exclusive agreement with them. And so that was how we got launched. They made all of our initial tooling for us. We purchased a milling machine and a lathe just like theirs, and we got up and running. And so it was pretty exciting. It was scary. It was a lot of work, but it was just absolutely fascinating. During that time frame, I also had a chance to meet with Wayne Schofield of Chip Wizards, who does Hartech's tuning. I was over there one time, and Wayne's an old school tuner from the 90s and has been doing a long time, and is absolutely brilliant. And we hit it off and spent, I think, it was supposed to just be a mill. 4 hours later, the pub was closing down and kicking us out. And that's somebody else who's been extremely valuable, a mentor of mine, and taught me how to tune the stock ECUs, which is a black art that there's no way I could have ever learned without his tutelage. And so that's what got us off and running.
Wow, the pursuit of certification was the inception of Slakker Racing Development.
Yeah, and just all the really interesting people that I met along the way, and just having infinite curiosity and trying to figure out what I could take and apply towards pushing the platform forward and continuing development on the M96 and M97 engines.
Could you have imagined it snowballing into what you have now?
No way. I said under no circumstances would we ever exceed 10 employees, because that's when there's kind of a breaking point there that I know that it becomes more, you end up spending more time on the business stuff than on the development stuff. But also, I think we're at 13 now. However, we've got a really good team of equally passionate people, and that makes it, a lot different than kind of my previous corporate experiences, and has made it really fun.
Appreciate that answer. A good answer to a good question. Okay, let's jump into question number 2 from Mike Kroc from Facebook. He asks, I'm done with all the standard stuff. What do you guys do that sets you apart? How long have you and your techs been doing this? Why Porsche? What motors do you improve upon from factory design, and how?
So I'll start with why Porsche. It chose me. I didn't choose it. I've always enjoyed German cars and the engineering behind them. Had multiple M cars, AMGs, and really just generally car ADD. Do all the research, get one, would be amazing. And a year later, I was starting to research my next one. That all stopped with my first 99 C2. A 997 Turbo was my first Porsche, but my 99 C2 was my first Porsche I fell in love with. And it's kind of all I could think about ever since. Spent a lot of time on Renlist in the early days, answering technical questions about it and having my technical questions answered. A lot of times I wouldn't know the answer, but I have a technical background, and so researching and finding out the real answer and then providing that was always something that was fun, because it was a win-win. I learned, they learned. And then as I started developing my car and taking it to the track for the first time and taking it to a point that it was about to be no longer comfortable to drive, then I bought my first race car, and immediately after the first time out on it, tore it all the way down. There was just something about that car that it wasn't the fastest car I'd had, but did handle pretty amazing. The analog nostalgic feel of that car is really, I think, what captured my soul, if you will. Today, my heart beats to the rhythm of a flat six engine. It's just, if something's not right in it, or if there's anything else, if it's been swapped or something, it just, no other engine sounds like that. And, it's what I listen for, and, it's the music I like to hear.
So that's why Porsche. And then what would you say sets us apart?
A few things that set us apart, really. One, since I didn't come from the industry, I didn't have a background in engines, I had to learn everything from scratch. And I'll never forget when I was learning when Hartech was teaching me how to refurbish a cylinder head, they were trying to teach me, the way you test the valve guide is with the wiggle test. And based on how much wiggle, if it has, essentially what I later learned was if it has anything over about 9 thou of wiggle to it, then the guide needs to be replaced. But if it's up to about 6 or 7 thou of wiggle, it's okay. And yeah, and so that 3 thou difference is essentially the size of a human hair. And so to be able to do that by feel, not having 30 years of engine building experience, I learned early on that we needed to learn to measure everything. And so that was really kind of what set us on our path, is the whole, if we can measure it, we can improve it, but also as a way to figure out what's myth and what's not. Another great example is on ring seating. Early on, I wasn't sure if ring seating was actually a thing, or if it was a myth, or if it was something we needed to worry about. And when our first couple of engines smoked on startup, we learned very quickly that ring seating really is a thing. And so with some help from Charles Brazil, who has the UAOS, we figured out how to measure blow-by on our dyno, essentially the gases that are escaping past the rings. So he also helped us come up with a protocol to where when we put an engine on the dyno, for the first 5 minutes, we'll warm it up, and then we'll take it to 3,000 RPMs for 30 minutes at 75 pounds of load, and then let it kind of settle for a bit, measure the blow-by, rinse and repeat. And that process is how we seat the rings and know that we finish our break-in process, those rings are seated and that engine's going to be ready to go. The other really big advantage that we have is Hartech's 30 years of experience machining, rebuilding, and racing these engines, and them providing all of their knowledge and insight and technology to support us. And we're going to go and look a few blocks now, and I can kind of show you the core behind their closed deck technology and why that's so important for the 99 through 08 911 Cayman and Boxster engines we do.
You want to do that right now?
Yeah, let's take a look. So we'll look at this one first. So this is a stock, I believe it's a M9605. So this is a 99736. And if you'll notice these cylinders here, you kind of got to get from above, they're all open around it. Now then, these are the cooling channels, but this is a floating cylinder design. So if I turn this over, even on the bottom, it's got some webbing between it, but it's still this open floating cylinder design. Now then, my understanding is they did this for casting purposes in this line of the 99, 911, or even a little earlier on the Boxsters. This was the first time that Porsche went to an open deck design. And it really was a flaw of this engine, unfortunately, and creates a lot of the problems that we see. And so in 09, Porsche went back to a closed deck design and has never returned to this on those type of engines. So coming over to this one, you can see even more why it's so important. So first thing we do is we mill out the old cylinders, and you see there's about a 3/4 of an inch shelf here, and that's all that supports those cylinders in place. And that's why we see so much ovality and why they don't seem to handle heat cycles in decades maybe as well as some of the older engines. In addition to milling out the old cylinders, we install support rings at the bottom so that we can make sure and keep the shape. There's not much load down there, but we want to make sure that we can keep the shape of the cylinders. And then up top here, we open up the cooling channels to get more flow in the coolant, and then we set it up to install our replacement cylinders. So this is what our replacement cylinders look like. We get it with a matching set of pistons, and so the cylinders and pistons are made by the same contract manufacturer for Hartech that also does F1 pistons. And so this cylinder has been pre-plated with Nicosil and honed to this exact piston. So it's a matching set. It's an aluminum-based cylinder, so the thermal expansion of the block and the cylinder are equivalent. We don't have thermal expansion issues like you could potentially have with steel sleeves. And if you look at the construction of it, there's a very thick portion across the top that we use for closing the deck. You've got these extra cooling ribs along here to increase cooling, but it also increase the structural rigidity. You've got this shelf that it's going to sit on that once again is heavily reinforced. And then by the time you add the 3/4 of an inch shelf or inside of the block, then, you know, well over what, 2/3 of where the combustion takes place is heavily reinforced. And so it was when looking at that and comparing it to the 997 and 996 turbo engines that I realized this is actually stouter than the famed Metzger, and that's when we started adding boost to these successfully. But if you look, this cylinder essentially drops in and closes off the deck. This one's a little smaller than this so that we can put it in like this and demonstrate. But when it's all said and done, we've got a nice, fully reinforced, essentially an endurance racing engine design that's meant to withstand high temps, high amounts of load, and extreme conditions for extended period of time. And it's a brilliant design. It's back taking what Porsche did the entire time with the Metzger engines, the 996 turbos and 997 turbos and GT3s, and what they went to with the 9A1s and adapting that technology to these engines and then some. It's really an over-engineered solution, which we love, and it's why we initially sought out Hartech and is the basis of everything that we do.
So that sums up question number 2. Shall we move into Q3?
Sure.
Let's do it. This one comes from Lucien Hudson Gutierrez from Facebook. Does a Slakker Racing Development 997.1 3.8 to 4.1 engine build raise the red line, deliver some peak torque in same power band, deliver similar linear torque, or is it completely different fuel than stock?
That's a great question and covers a lot of kind of the key questions that I think a lot of people would have. And so I'll start with the torque question. What we're looking at there is on, first and foremost, most of the engines that we build, except for the stock class race engines typically, are a displacement upgrade. And so we may be taking a 3.8 to 4.1 or a 3.6 or a 3.4 even, or 3.4 to 3.9. That displacement increase right off the bat is going to give that much more torque throughout the band as long as the airflow can support it. Low range, mid range, we see it consistently, and it's pretty much in line. If we go from 3.8 to 4.1, that's typically going to be an 8% increase all the way up until pretty close to the top of the rev range. And that is just simply by more volume. The interesting thing is many people see a fuel mileage increase because of that, and it's because the engine typically doesn't have to work as hard to do the same amount of work. And so a lot of times people will go to a higher gear quicker, and so essentially providing more efficiency. Now then, if they're wide open throttle and giving it everything they've got, that's a different story. More power is going to use more fuel. My favorite example of that is really what is my favorite Top Gear episode, in which they had a Toyota Prius and a BMW, I believe it was an M5, on track. And they wanted to see which one got better gas mileage. You would think, well, of course the Toyota Prius is going to get better gas mileage, right? Not so fast. The setup was the Toyota Prius had to drive around the track as fast as it possibly could, and the BMW M5 just had to keep up with it. And so the larger motor, the larger displacement, not having to work as hard to do the work, the BMW got the better gas mileage. And so I've always thought that was a cool test of theirs. Beyond displacement, it comes down to how the engine's designed. And if we dive into that, essentially the intake manifolds, the heads, the cams, you can't have peak power everywhere. And so you've got to pick a range. Those are all built for around 5,500 to 7,000 RPMs. is where they're best designed to perform. And then there's two pieces of technology, especially on the what we call the 3-chain engines, the '02 through '08s, and some also on the '99 through '01 that are focused on the, say, 3,500 to about that 5,000, 5,500 range, that elevate the torque in that mid-range and give it that flat torque line that we love so much. That's why on the non-turbo cars, they're not necessarily the quickest off the line, but once you get them going, for instance, in road racing situations, they're phenomenal. Above 3,500 RPM, they really come alive and perform, and you've got good, consistent torque all the way to that red line. Now then, it does start falling off at that 7,000 mark pretty quickly because of that design, and so that's why we haven't focused as much on the high RPM yet. We do have a high RPM build coming up that we will work on extending that range or moving that range a little higher, but it's not just, hey, if I extend the RPM, it'll go faster. There's a lot more to it. But we've got some more show and tell today, and so we can go look at some of those pieces that help it have higher torque in that mid-range band, and then also some of the designs that we like and how we like to build our engines to maximize that.
Let's take a look at it.
All right. So the first one is the intake distribution tube, and this sits at the back between the intake manifold runners. And if you'll notice, this has a flap inside, and this vacuum actuated flap will close and open. The reason for this design is that based on the length of the intake manifold runners, there are waves that bounce back and forth between the cylinders. These are resonance waves. And if you can time those waves to where right when you're opening the valve, that wave is hitting the valve, then that produces a little extra pressure, a little bit more air into the cylinder, and increases the power. As I was mentioning, these intake runners are designed around that upper RPM range. This is a 997.1S 3.8 liter intake manifold versus this is the 997.1 and the 987.1S Cayman manifold. This is actually a Cayman part number that's used on the 997.1. And so essentially both of these are designed for the upper RPM range for tuning those resonance waves. But when I close this flap, or when this flap closes, now the waves are going to hit and bounce back faster. That shorter travel path, it improves the amount of torque that we see in the mid-range. Is it enough to matter? So we've tested multiple times with this flap open, with the flap closed, and it's worth on our 4.1 engines. This is worth about 25 foot-pounds of peak torque. So it's a very significant amount. This flap stays closed all the way. We'll see about 25 to 30 horsepower of decreased peak horsepower. So having it close at the exact right time and open back up at the right time, that is one of the two major keys for filling in that mid-range torque band and giving these cars the feel that they have. The other big piece is the vario cam. And on the 3-chain engines, this is a 0 to 40 degrees advancement on the cam, and it's phased. And so that advancement phases in and it phases out. And typically on our engines, we'll phase it all the way up to 40 degrees. That's 40 crank degrees, actually 20 cam degrees. And so we'll phase it all the way in, and then around 4,000 RPMs, we'll start phasing it all the way back out. This sucker, around 5125, is the exact RPM range that the engine likes to see it open back up. If we do it a little bit later or a little bit earlier, it will actually affect the torque band throughout the rest of the pull because it's no longer working in concert with the cam advancement, and it creates disruption. We can actually see ripples on the dyno graph. Earlier, the 996.1s, 99 through '01, also have this functionality. They have this exact resonance flaps used pretty much from 99 to '08. But the vario cams, the early ones, they were an on-off. they only advance 20 degrees, crank degrees, and so we don't see as much mid-range gain out of them. But then in O2, that's when we really start to see a big difference. Then also, because of that, that's why this 3.8 liter manifold consistently gets us the best results and is our favorite one, even against the X51 manifold. We've had a couple of customers ask us to test both of them back to back. This always wins hand down, specifically with area under the curve, or how much extra torque it gets throughout the mid and upper range. And the reason is, on the X51 manifold, they've got a large open plenum, and so it may get a couple more peak horsepower. However, because it takes away this resonance flap, we see a big drop in torque and much less area under the curve. And you can see design-wise, now then this 3, it's a little bit harder to retrofit. We'll get Philip on at some point and dive deeper into why this design works so much better. But if you just look at it, you can see there's a lot of curve coming down and around to this one, where they flattened this one up and made it a straighter path. They both have about the same taper going down to here. A lot of times you'll see taper down to the port, and then the port will be smaller than this and then open back up into the chamber, and that creates a Venturi effect. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about hogging out the head to port match this intake manifold, and that's never a good idea. You lose the Venturi effect when you do that. And then one other piece, this is what the stock plenum looks like. You can see it's a straight through open design right here. And then it has the bolt pattern for the 74 millimeter throttle body that's used on the 911s and Caymans through that generation. And so we have seen gains from adding an 82 millimeter throttle body, and just not really on how much air we're getting through there, but it seems to give it just a little bit more velocity. Typically, we may not see more than 3 to 5 horsepower gain, but we do kind of see it stack. And so it is a real gain, but it's also why we don't like some of the popular plenum replacement designs that have a wedge in it. So while it may improve flow coming into the intake, it disrupts those resonance waves that we were talking about. And so we may see a 200 or 300 RPM band where we get a little more torque, but we'll see less torque throughout the upper range because of that disruption of those resonance waves that Porsche works so hard to tune. And so it's actually working against the design of the engine. So when we do go to an 82 millimeter throttle body, we simply go to something very similar to this, something that just has a larger opening on it to accommodate that larger 82 millimeter GT3 throttle body. And so that's kind of our approach to working with the natural Porsche design in the RPM range that it's designed around, and where we see both the best results, both on the street and just feel on the dyno when we're measuring, and most importantly on the track where we're competing and really trying to push it to the limits.
Well, that sums up question number 3. Brandon, I'm curious, where do you see this platform going?
Well, I think we've got some other great questions that we want to answer, that diving into it probably on the next episode. We can look forward to discussion of the oil starvation issue, which is really kind of the critical flaw. The highest number of failures we see are due to spun rod bearings from oil starvation, which is a catastrophic failure. And so I think we need to dive into that one sooner rather than later. But also I think it would be interesting. There's a lot of people that I think are really smart and I've learned a lot from over the last few years, that I think it would be fun to have a few guests on.
You'd be willing to do that?
And hear their story, and maybe dive into some subjects with them, as well as the opportunity for more listeners and viewers to submit questions and see what they're interested in hearing.
Nice. So it seems like we have a lot of work to do.
Definitely.
Perfect. Well, if you've listened up to this point, I appreciate you guys for tuning in the episode 2 of Ask Brandon. We, as you can hear, are going to be working on more stuff, so definitely stay tuned. Brandon, anything else you want to say just before we cast off into the garage and start putting our heads down?
Just thank you to you for putting this together, our team, the Porsche community. It's been a lot of fun, and I think we've got a lot of interesting topics to explore.
We definitely do. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.